craft use of food, just because we talked about it. This morning I had breakfast in this building down here because I stayed over, and I just had this perfect kind of practice of food use right in front of me. People went to the buffet to get their breakfast, and they sat down and took their iPads out and their phones, and they were literally like this. And I just thought, what are we doing? This is how food is consumed by a lot of people these days, it seems. On the other hand, you have wonderful big round tables, and people socialized, chatted, they looked really happy. They were probably there with a group of colleagues for some sort of event. And so you had these kind of contrasting images of food practice, and I just thought I share this with you because I think that's the conundrum we're facing. This is a project that I run with several people at Essex, Jules Pretty, Zareen Barucha, and Dave Watson, who's actually in the room here. So Dave is doing a PhD on very much this topic, and we've been working on this together for quite a while. I named this green growth, which is actually a nice sort of overlap with Kate's brilliant presentation. You haven't talked much about post-growth, but maybe that's something we can come back to. This question of growth, which I connect to speed, and what exactly do you mean by post-growth? And of course, there are a lot of people talking about green growth these days. I'll name it Green Growth 2.0. It's sort of my fashion aspect of it, just to be the hipster kind of green growth guy. But what we have really sort of tried to explore at Essex are the practices of what we call ecocultures, and that's what I would like to talk to you about today. This is the reality of retail, of the economy, whether that's food, fashion, or any other aspect. Hashtag Asda Black Friday, right? I mean, this Black Friday thing has been imported from the States by Asda, which is part of Walmart, by Amazon. They've just literally introduced this over the last year or two, and these are the scenes. Right? These are the scenes we're getting. Why are these companies doing it? Because there are huge sales pressures. These kind of events, and Christmas, Easter, these are all events to get merchandise moving. It's about speed. Get the stuff over the counter, and get people through the door into the stores, and get the merchandise moving. This is the reality of the economy we live in. Another image. This is, as you can see it's soon coming up. Soon, Santa will appear in the shops. Right? Summer has barely finished, but it will happen any day now. Is he? Oh, okay. Food. This is the majority of food consumption in this country at the moment, right? Rows and rows and rows of stuff in humongous supermarkets. They're getting bigger and bigger. Of course, there's also an alternative trend that some of the stores are getting smaller and smaller. But as you mentioned, Kate, we know all this stuff doesn't actually make us happier. This is a study by my colleague Jules Pretty at Essex, which shows very conclusively that over long periods of time, this is the graph that plots GDP per head increasing steadily in the US as well as the UK. But what basically stays more or less the same? Life satisfaction. In fact, it might actually go down a bit, right? So the more and more stuff we consume, it doesn't actually make us any happier. It doesn't make us more satisfied with our lives. In fact, the opposite might be true. So why are we doing it? It's that's the conundrum. That's another graph that shows, that's comparing a lot of countries across the world. And again, it shows, if GDP, that's life satisfaction, that's GDP per capita, raising GDP does have an impact, but only for the very poor, right? If you're very poor, of course having some income has a huge impact. Of course. But at some stage, the increase is marginal, right? And at some stage, the increase is so, to life satisfaction is so marginal, it's actually not worth doing, because the implications of adding more and more GDP, the implications for sustainability, etc., are of course humongous, right? So, the UK is probably somewhere sort of, in this cluster here, right? This is probably, Switzerland or whatever, Norway. Do we all want to be like Switzerland and Norway? Well, I don't know. These discussions have been around for a long, long time, and people realize that just adding profit, GDP numbers, and piling them on top of each other is not going to take us closer to where we want to be. We have to consider people. We have to consider the planet. So the 3 Ps, the sustainable green economy, it's been on everybody's mind for a long time. Starting perhaps at the political level with the Rio process. Some of you will remember the Rio Earth Summit in 1992. This was Rio +20, which happened about 3 years ago. And just in 2 days, actually, or tomorrow, we will have this event where world leaders again will gather in New York at the UN and adopt the new Sustainable Development Goals. And they're full of the right talk. We need to bring people, planet, and profit together. We need to think about, not just growth, but sustainable growth. We need to think about not just adding jobs, but sustainable employment, inclusive employment. We need to think about inclusive education. We need to think about protecting ecosystems, the climate, etc., etc. It's all there. It's all there. We know a lot about what needs to be done, but there's a huge gap in terms of what the actual practices, what the actual crafts of use are. The actual practices in the food sector look like this, mostly. And the companies, the big agribusiness companies, they all talk about sustainability, because sustainability can be interpreted, can be done in all sorts of different ways. And if you read the sustainability reports that all the major companies are now issuing, it all sounds good. And they all, if you look at Monsanto, they are completely in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. Their major Sustainable Development Goal that they're supporting is eradicating poverty. How do they do it? Through GM food tech, which is ending up like this. That there are all sorts of contradictions and implications for all the other Sustainable Development Goals is, of course, that's contested. That's what the contestation is about, right? So sustainable growth often looks like this as well. This looks like trees. We need trees. Absorbs carbon from the atmosphere. But if you if you talk to a forestry specialist, they wouldn't say this is a forest, right? This is a tree monoculture, which has all sorts of bad environmental and social implications. I'm putting these pictures up because they are sort of projects I've been involved with behind these. So I've done projects, a research project around the implications of tree monocultures in South America. This is a project I studied in Uruguay, which is a huge pulp mill using these trees that you've just seen to produce pulp and paper, all for export going to Europe and other places. But this factory creating a lot of negative sustainable externalities in the area is sold in a green way because they happen to have a little renewable energy unit attached to it, which they power with the residue of the trees that they're felling, right? So that's an image of green growth, and it's sold to us as green growth, right? Because there's some renewable energy attached to it, which is great. But look at the whole commodity chain, the whole thing looks differently. Another project I've been involved with is mining in Argentina. Look at the mining sustainability reports of the big companies. They're all full of sustainability and CSR, corporate social responsibility. They all talk about it. But if somebody locally in these countries actually says, well, look, nice that you support communities and nice that you provide jobs, etc. But I'm sorry, we don't actually want you here because we have all sorts of fears that you contaminate our water supplies, etc., etc. Then that's a no-go area, right? There are a lot of contestations we studied in the Andes, which has seen an absolute boom in the mining industry. This is Drax, the biggest power station in UK. They've had lots, billions of governmental support to change, make switch their power supply from coal to wood pellets. Where do the wood pellets come from? From original growth forests in the US and Canada. How's this sold to us? As a big achievement of the green economy. We're cutting down old growth forests in the US so that Drax can be green, right? So another example of pure greenwash, okay? So a lot of my work has to do with the kind of uncovering greenwash and looking at the realities of the so-called green economy that is sort of sold to us as being green and sustainable, not just in the food sector, but in lots of other sectors. But this book, which was published about a year ago, is trying to be very positive and say, well, we can do it properly. And there's a great overlap with what Kate presented here. And I think a lot has to do with speed, and you mentioned speed and slowness. We just got to slow down, basically. And that's very true for food production and consumption as well. So what we've done in this book, it's not a monograph by myself, Zareen and Jules, but it's an edited collection, literally bringing scholars as well as practitioners together from across the globe who've provided case studies of what we term ecocultures, which are in fact communities that have a very close connection to nature and particularly the land, which slows them down, I think, and who also have very tight social ties, what some people call social capital. I don't particularly like this term social capital, but it's been sort of the dominant use in the literature. We call it strong strong, weak ties, which goes back to the work of Granovetter, who talks about weak ties being important for social cohesion and the health of communities. So one of the case studies is, for example, from fisher folk, the Bayo in Indonesia. They've been living like this for thousands of years, in the seas of Indonesia. Indigenous people living a life that is very closely connected to the land, or to nature, to the ocean. The majority of their food comes from fishing, as it were. They're living in these communities on the sea. We also have case studies from the Arctic regions, one from Greenland, one from Finland, where there are communities living off the land and with the land, and have been doing so for a long, long time. So these are very detailed case studies of how these communities function, and of course also how they're being threatened, how their life is threatened at the moment through climate change. The further north you go, I have a visiting professorship in Sweden, so I sort of seen that firsthand. Basically, if you go to the north of Scandinavia, everybody knows about climate change because they've seen it getting worse over the last 10, 20 years. They don't have the icy long periods that they used to have. And that's supported by a climate science that says basically in the Arctic regions, it's really changing very, very fast. So these communities are threatened right now, but they're also threatened by mining developments. Greenland signed last year a big law that invites lots of international mining companies to come to Greenland as the ice melts to come in and exploit the riches, right? So these are the pressures they're under. Okay, so what are these ecocultures and what are the implications for food? Ecocultures are communities where people reconnect with land and nature, and in the case of food, through food growing, for example, community gardens. So another project we've been working on with Dave and Zareen is looking at alternative food projects, particularly looking at participation of people in food projects in the east of England, where we've particularly been interested in how people engage with food growing, and that's very much along the lines of what Kate talked about in relationship to fashion. How they reconnect to people, right? So these are the two main aspects: reconnecting to nature, the land, and reconnecting to people. And we studied various food projects. For example, something called community-supported agriculture, which I'll talk about in a minute. So the key themes are here: involving people, let them participate, co-produce with them. It's exactly the message that I think I heard Kate saying as well. So community-supported agriculture, CSA, it's not a household name. So let me explain a little bit what that is. So it's basically a small business where a farmer invites people to basically become part of their business, right? And where consumers share the risks in farming, right? So I'm part of a CSA project where I live in Essex, and we pay. It basically works a bit like a box scheme. Per week, per month, you you transfer money to the farmer, in return you get your veg. But difference is you commit to doing that for one season of produce. So in a way you're buying a share of a season's produce, and then you basically in return you get whatever is being produced, right? And we are invited to go onto the farm and actually work on the farm as well. So I took my kids literally last weekend onto this farm. It's Benison Farm near where I live. This is the farmer, Danny. He supports his family. He's got 3 young kids as well. That's his business, that's his livelihood. These are fellow consumers who are actually helping out on the farm when they can. And these are the boxes, which are actually bags that we get every week. So for us, that's an ecoculture. Why? Because we are not consumers who just buy veg from him, but we're actually taking interest in his business. We're taking part, we are co-producing. We are reconnecting to fellow consumers. We're reconnecting to the land. We're getting actually our hands dirty. We know, my kids know where the potatoes come from because we harvested them last weekend, and we'll have them in our bag next week, right? And that's, from an educational point of view, priceless. And then basically we were interested in this project, in plotting this participation in these kind of projects to well-being scores. And that's statistical stuff. The take-home messages that we actually showed that the more people participate in such projects, the higher the scores of well-being, right? Well-being being a kind of a real interest in the nation at the moment, because depression, mental health problems, etc., are rising fast. So if you actually get involved in these projects, it's good for you. So let me conclude, right? So the new food practices that I think we need, they go beyond the production-consumption divide, because prosumers are happier and live better. Their higher scores of well-being, their better diets, if you reconnect to the land, if you actually get your hands dirty, and if you reconnect to other people, i.e. you socialize. Because what the dominant food system is telling us to do is go to a big supermarket, buy our stuff, and then we end up sitting at the table checking our emails while we're kind of eating a fast food meal. That's a lot of how food consumption is taking place. And of course, even in mainstream culture, that is being challenged massively. But here in these projects, in these eco-cultural communities that we found is, you don't. It's not just about how you cook food, but it's about how you engage with other people and how you reconnect to the land and getting your hands dirty. I stop here. Thank you.